Welcome back to Christian Companions. Again, for those of you who might have stumbled upon this video, this is a 55 and older, 55 and better, I would say, aged Sunday school class, usually meeting at 10:30 on Sunday mornings, but during COVID we're doing this video series of Christian Companions, and we go through a curriculum. So if you are joining us and you don't have a book, you might get confused because I'm reading out of something. For those of you who are normally here with us, welcome back. Hopefully you got your book. I sure have. If you remember last week I didn't have my commentary yet. Now I do, so I'll be able to kind of jump in a little bit better and easier. We are in Genesis 41. We were talking about Joseph for the next, I think we're talking about a couple more weeks here, if I recall. Anyhow, so yeah, I know I say this a lot, but I'm going to say it again. This might be a shorter video simply because the story is narrative, and when it's just a narrative, when it's just a story and it's not, theology or philosophy or anything like that, there's not usually a ton to add on my end. So the commentary can be basically the end-all, catch-all of what we need to talk about. So let's jump in. We're going to talk Genesis 41, 25 through 33, and then verses 37 through 40 and 50 through 52. And this is what it says in the NIV. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. There are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. Are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man, and put him in charge of the land of Egypt." The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my troubles and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim, and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." So, let's keep going. Introduction. Immigrants face a host of difficulties when settling into new countries. Cultural differences can be the biggest hurdles to being accepted in a community, a neighborhood, or by coworkers. Some immigrants do not invest the time or resources necessary to adopt the cultural mores of their new country. Sometimes it's not about lack of time or resources, but about lack of desire. Fitting in with cultural expectations of the new country may threaten the identity that a person has come to cherish. Fear of losing that identity can be isolating. One way self-identity is threatened is by rejecting the religion of the immigrant's country of origin. When a particular religion or faith expression has been integral to personal identity for decades, then challenges to that religion or expression may result in an identity crisis. Today's lesson features a man who faced a similar challenge. Joseph, sold into slavery in Egypt, adopted various facets of Egyptian culture as his own, while being most resistant to changing his one-God worldview, known as monotheism. Joseph looked, acted, and spoke like an Egyptian most of the time, but he did not lose his sense of dependence on God and a pagan culture. Whether in prison or in power, Joseph remained God's man, obedient, faithful, and willing to give God the credit. Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think there's much to add to that. That was pretty good. Excuse me. Lesson context. Following the events of last week's lesson, Joseph was sold to an Egyptian official named Potiphar. Joseph quickly found favor in Potiphar's eyes and was promoted to a position of great responsibility within Potiphar's household. Potiphar's wife, however, constantly pressured Joseph to sleep with her. Joseph refused every time. On one occasion Joseph ran from Potiphar's wife, his cloak was torn from him and left behind. She used it to accuse Joseph falsely of attempted rape. As a result, Potiphar had Joseph thrown in prison. Here, too, Joseph proved himself worthy of responsibility. Dreams once again enter Joseph's story through two fellow prisoners. Joseph's experience had taught him that only God can reveal the true meaning of dreams. The divinely inspired interpretations Joseph provided for each man's dream came true. One man was put to death, and the other one was restored to his position. Joseph requested of the latter that after regaining his position, he would mention Joseph to the Pharaoh. The man, however, forgot about Joseph for 2 years. Pharaoh had his own incomprehensible dreams. Though the content was easily conveyed, neither Pharaoh nor any of his magicians or wise men understood them. In the first dream, 7 healthy cows had come forth from the Nile. They were followed by 7 cows, ugly and gaunt. Pharaoh said of the cows, "I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt." Amazingly, the ugly cows devoured the healthy ones. Much the same occurred in Pharaoh's second dream, though the details differed. 7 heads of grain appeared on a single stalk. Then there appeared 7 withered heads of grain that had been scorched by a hot east wind. The thin heads of grain proceeded to eat up all the fully grown heads of grain. When Pharaoh spoke of this conundrum, the forgetful former prisoner remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh of Joseph's identity to interpret dreams accurately. Joseph was quickly taken from the prison, made presentable, and brought before Pharaoh. Whew, yeah, they skip a lot. Like we went from Joseph being a very, very young man, stripped of his clothes and sold into slavery, all the way to Joseph, full-grown man, having done much of it in his life. He was sold to Potiphar, and he rose through the ranks of Potiphar's, and he basically ran Potiphar's house, which was a big deal at the time. And then when he was thrown in jail, he did so well there that the jail master said, "You are now in charge of the jail, and I will be in charge of you." So everywhere Joseph goes, he ascends to the top because he loves God and he works hard. So now we're getting to where he's about to take over Egypt, basically. So let's jump right in. 41:25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do." So though Pharaoh had dreamed 2 dreams, they carried one and the same message. After Pharaoh recounted his dreams, the first words Joseph spoke tell us something of the heart of this faithful servant of the Lord. "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires," which is from 41:16. God, not Joseph, would set Pharaoh's anxious mind at ease, which again just goes to show who Joseph is as a person. Joseph is often a type pointing to Jesus in a lot of ways, which I'm not going to get into right now because I'd go on forever, but Joseph is my favorite character, I think, in the Bible, outside of Jesus, because he's just always trying to do what's right for God, and he always relies on God well. Anyhow, let's keep moving. Verse 26, "The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream." The number 7 in both dreams represents a number of years. Joseph's reassurance that it is one and the same dream clarifies that the good cows and the good heads of grain represent the same 7 years, not 14, which could have been confusing. Continuing, "The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain, scorched by the east wind. They are the 7 years of famine." Similarly, the 7 lean, ugly cows and the 7 worthless heads of grain represent a new set of 7 years. These 7 years will be defined by famine. So far, so good. Let's keep trucking. 28. "It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do." So again, Joseph emphasized that he himself was not the source of the interpretation. The significance of insisting on honoring God is partially found in ancient beliefs about the way gods ruled. Most people took for granted that multiple gods existed and governed the world. These gods were often associated with a group of people in a specific locale. Whenever a person moved to another nation or people group, it was believed that he or she had left that deity's jurisdiction and come under the reign of another. Yes, this is very true. I'm going to stop right there real quick. Gods were regional. I think I've said that probably plenty of times in here. Gods were a very regional thing. So a good example would be when Jonah was on the boat and there was a storm at sea and they were about to throw him over. All the people on the ship were praying to their gods just to make sure that, just to cover all their bases. Like, they didn't know whose god might have been the god of that region, so they were like, let's all pray to our gods and hope one of them sticks. Jonah wasn't praying, and they all accused him of, they were like, well, he must be the problem, and threw him overboard. And so gods were a very regional idea. So if you went from Canaan to Egypt, you stopped worshiping the Canaan god and started worshiping the Egyptian gods. But not so for the people of Yahweh. Keep moving. Joseph, however, held to a very different view of God, one consistent with what the Bible teaches. This knowledge about God's character and dominion left Joseph with no doubt that God, 1, had sent the dreams, 2, provided the interpretation, and 3, would follow through on what the dreams had revealed. Joseph's God was not a fictitious Egyptian deity. The Lord would show himself able to carry out his will in any country, not just among the people who knew him. Yeah. So, again, a lot of what God does in the Old Testament and in the New Testament is always counter to the culture. We are counterculture today as well, kind of. But yeah, so it was a very regional thing. It was always polytheism, and the God of the Bible was a monotheistic God who's over and reigns everywhere. So 29 and 30. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. Actually, let's include 31 too. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. And in the commentary, for the first time, Joseph revealed specifically what the healthy cows and the healthy grain represented. The Hebrew word translated severe describes something too oppressive or heavy to bear. The phrases are piled up, repeating in stark language that the good years will be forgotten, as the famine would end up being a nationally devastating event. Yeah, I almost wanted to put a note in here of like, yeah, remember 2019? Barely. Or like, oh yeah, remember May? Not really, because this has been such a long, crazy year of bad news, it seems like. It's kind of the same thing. Kind of when things are bad and they continue, kind of forget things happen. Anyhow, it was going to be a bad joke, but there you go. Verse 32. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So once again, repetition serves to emphasize this time the emphasis is by the dream having come to Pharaoh in 2 forms. God was firmly committed to the years of plenty and of famine that the dreams predicted. As Joseph spoke to Pharaoh, he might have remembered his own double dream that his family would bow to him. Though Joseph didn't know when, he would be confident that God would bring these things to pass. The twofold format also suggested urgency in heeding the dreams. God would soon fulfill what he had revealed. We do not know exactly how long after the dreams the 7 years of plenty began, but the implication of the twice-dreamed dream was clear. Pharaoh had no time to waste in preparing for what lay ahead for his people. Once more, Joseph emphasized God's work in granting Pharaoh the dreaming and giving Joseph their interpretation. Pharaoh's the dream and giving Joseph the interpretation, Instead of taking credit for his own wisdom and insight, thus promoting his own interest, Joseph continued to point to God's work through him. God may have seemed absent to Joseph, especially when a fellow prisoner forgot him for 2 years, but God's continued favor in giving Joseph interpretations undoubtedly reassured the man that the Lord was present with him, even in or especially in prison. The Lord had not forgotten his faithful servant. At the beginning of Joseph's time, both in Potiphar's house and in prison, we are reminded that the Lord was with Joseph. Whether Joseph was aware of it or not, God never left his side. That phrase, with Joseph, is repeated all throughout Joseph's story. God was with Joseph. God being with Joseph. God was with Joseph. It's all the time. It's throughout. And it's, again, to represent that Joseph was always committed to following Yahweh no matter where he was. And God never forgot him in that. And every time of trouble, God was with him, no matter where he went. So, well worth remembering that. And again, I just love that repeated idea of it's not Joseph isn't, I'm so wise. Joseph isn't going, it's because my relationship with God being so special that I can do this. He's putting all the impetus on God. We even see Moses struggle with this. When Moses, God told Moses to strike the rock and let water come out at Meribah. Ooh, I don't know if that's true. But he struck the rock and water came flowing out, right? Well, then, a few chapters later, Moses said, do you want me to strike this rock and make water come out? Because it basically shows that Moses had gotten this lofty idea of himself. Look what I can do. I struck this rock and water came out. And this is part of the reason why God says you are not going to enter the promised land, because you have sinned against me. You have forgotten my name and what I have done for you in this way. And so even Moses struggled with this idea of, it's not me, it's all God. Joseph's going, no, not any part of this is me, which is amazing. And we'll keep moving. Verse 33. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man, and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. So knowing what the dreams meant was of vital importance. However, that knowledge was worthless without a plan to use the information appropriately. Thus, Joseph took the initiative in making the suggestion we see here. Joseph further suggested a plan for the appointed man to put into action. We kind of skipped that part, but Joseph then is like, look for somebody who's wise and discerning, and then gives a perfect plan of what to do, and that's where we pick up in verse 37. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. The phrase all of his officials likely refers to various administrators in Pharaoh's government, including the magicians and wise men who had been unable to interpret Pharaoh's dream. Their unanimous approval may indicate God's having blessed not only Joseph with understanding, but also the bestowal of wisdom on the Egyptians gathered. Worth wondering if Potiphar is there, because Potiphar was high up in Pharaoh's court. Is this the same Pharaoh? Could Potiphar have been there? That would be an interesting question to ask, and to see if he was in agreement with this man he had thrown in prison. We could have there's a whole part of Potiphar's story that I'm kind of sad we skipped over because it's really interesting. For another time. 38. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man? One in whom is the Spirit of God? I hope this is rhetorical. Pharaoh's words here do not necessarily reflect faith in God, comparing acknowledgement of the Spirit of the holy gods in Daniel 4 and 5. There is no indication that he renounced other gods or came to believe in the one true God. He simply acknowledges that a deity or deities, since the Hebrew can be translated plural, who sent the dream also sent the interpretation to the man of his choosing. In the same way, Pharaoh would likely expect that if an Egyptian god sent a dream, then that same deity would be the one who gave or withheld interpretation. In any case, the phrasing acknowledged divine favor of Joseph. Though Joseph was a foreigner and a slave and a prisoner in Egypt, Pharaoh didn't mention any of this. Of greatest significance to him was that Joseph showed himself to be the man Egypt needed. Perhaps to discourage any questions about Joseph's loyalty or skill, Pharaoh gave him an Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah, which may mean something like revealer of secrets. A little part of me thinks this was semi-rhetorical, like I said before I read that. Can we find anyone like this man? One in whom is the Spirit of God? I think it was either rhetorical, meaning we know the answer, it's him, or it was a kind of a push-off of like, this man is a slave and a prisoner, and while he interpreted our dreams, is there anyone else like him that can lead? But then Sarah said to Joseph in verse 39, since God has made all this known to you, there's no one so discerning and wise as you. So that's why I'm led to believe this is a rhetorical question. No one else had Joseph's divinely given insight. The God who had sent the dreams had also provided a particular man to interpret them. Pharaoh agreed with Joseph completely in that the dreams and their interpretations were not of human origin. Since the man Joseph obviously had been given a divine stamp of approval, Pharaoh followed suit. No one can interpret Pharaoh's dreams, and then one man can, and once his dream has been interpreted, the man gives him advice on what to do next, and so naturally you're going to follow that guy. Seems like a logical conclusion to what they were doing. Yes, I had to look something up for something coming up. Here we go. Verse 40. Excuse me. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you? So to Pharaoh, it seemed only right that someone with the insight and intelligence that Joseph clearly possessed should be the one to administer the plan he suggested. Joseph's responsibilities were very similar to what they had been in Potiphar's house and the prison. The key difference was that the only person in a higher position was Pharaoh himself. Hindsight tells us that God had been preparing Joseph for the position ever since he arrived in Egypt. What an amazing change of status for someone who, just 24 hours earlier, had been a forgotten prisoner. Joseph went from a pit to power. Genesis 41 through 45, not in our printed text today, records the actions taken by Pharaoh to confirm Joseph's new position in Egypt. Joseph diligently carried out the task of amassing grain in preparation for the coming famine. The story is amazing how much Joseph planned and prepared, and then when the famine hits, how he perfectly distributes the grain so that it goes to everyone in their need and is met. It's great. It's a great story. And how he's basically second in command of Egypt, which I'm trying to think of a comparison. It's like if our vice president was, I'm trying to think, if our vice president was some guy from Mexico City named Jose Alcantara, and you're like, well, what is his special qualifications? And it was, well, he's in a massive amount of debt, and his family gave him up. You're like, he's the vice president? Yeah, he is. It's crazy. That's a wild thing to happen. So, moving on. Verse 50a. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. So, though this is a normal relational progression, marriage then children, this note also shows the depth of Joseph's trust in God. Joseph was preparing for the famine that he firmly believed was coming, yet he was so confident that God had provided for those lean years that he was not hesitant about introducing new mouths to Egypt. This may foreshadow his care for other nations, and especially his estranged family. Personally, I think that's reading too much into it. I think, especially at this time, he got married and had kids. That's what happens when you're married, and this time especially. I think reading into him having children as some act of faith is a little bit of a stretch. Personally. You can disagree, they clearly do, that's fine. We can disagree, I don't care. I do care. I need to be careful of the words I use, especially with I don't care. I don't mind if you disagree, that's what I should say. Let's keep going before I put my foot in my mouth again. 50b, by Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. On was a city in Egypt located just northeast of modern Cairo. On was the location of a temple devoted to the worship of the Egyptian sun god Ra. The Greeks later called the city Heliopolis, meaning city of the sun. The name Potipharah, not to be confused with Potiphar, means he whom Ra has given. Joseph's marriage to Asenath, the daughter of a pagan priest, raises eyebrows. After all, her family was devoted to idolatry, and pagan wives had a way of introducing compromise into a husband's devotion to the Lord. Example, 1 Kings 11:1-6. Basically, everything that ever happened to Solomon. Also, Paul warns about that. Yet there is no suggestion here or elsewhere that Asenath ever influenced Joseph toward idolatry. Even in marriage to an Egyptian bride, Joseph relied on the one true God. One thing I want to say about this, there is an argument to be made that Potiphar is Potiphar. It's not, I would say it's not a hard or easy argument to make. It plays both sides of that. If he became a priest, they probably would have changed his name, and since he's serving it On, which is for Ra, and his name is Potiphar, changing it to Potiphar would be a natural and easy way to change it. And Potiphar and Potiphar are so close that Potiphar more than likely means something to do with Ra as well. So there's this argument that he could have either... There's an argument to me that Potiphar and Potiphar are the same person with a name change. Or that the name didn't change and it was just a misinterpretation. Either way, yeah, it probably doesn't matter. But to think that Joseph married Potiphar's daughter is more like funny in an ironic way than a ha-ha way. You see what I'm saying. Anyhow, let's keep moving. Verse 51, Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my troubles and all my father's household." So Manasseh sounds like the Hebrew word meaning forget. God caused Joseph to forget the hard times that had characterized his life for the previous 13 years. Compare Joseph's age in Genesis 37:2 with that recorded in 41:46. In relation to his father's household, this probably means that Joseph no longer held any grudges or ill will toward his brothers, since he could begin to see those circumstances in a new light. At the same time, it is clear that Joseph had not forgotten God, nor had God forgotten him. Though the name of his firstborn emphasizes forgetting, the name would also remind Joseph of what had been forgotten and ensure that it was not really lost into his memory, which is fair. And then finally, the second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." I know some of you are probably sitting at home going, it's Ephraim or Ephraim or some combination. Our book says Ephraim, which I think is closer to what I have to say, so I think I'm right. I'm just being silly. I think it's Ephraim, but say it, as we always say any name in the Old Testament with confidence and people will believe you. It doesn't matter if you're right or not. It's Ephraim. There it is. Ephraim sounds like the Hebrew word meaning twice fruitful. It probably reflects the fact that God has given Joseph 2 sons. The name likely praised God for the blessing that Joseph was experiencing in Egypt. Furthermore, the name may have celebrated the abundance of a land about to be hit by famine. This suggests once again that Joseph confidently trusted in God's provision during the lean times. Again, I think that's a stretch. Just as God has brought Joseph through suffering before, Joseph came to anticipate that God would bring him, his family, and all Egypt through a great famine. The name Ephraim also seems to foreshadow the story of Jacob's family in Egypt for generations to come. God would not forget Jacob, Israel, just as God had not forgotten Joseph. Joseph himself was given a new Egyptian name, and by implication an Egyptian identity, but he gave both of his sons Hebrew names. Doing so acknowledged the presence and provision of the God of his Hebrew family, in his life. And also emphasized that Joseph still thought about the family of his youth, apparently fondly enough to choose names in his native tongue. Yeah, that I think does have significance. I think the fact that Joseph, because this happens a lot, if a prisoner or a slave is brought to a new country with a new language and a new religion and a new everything, they would change the name. We see that in Daniel. When the Israelites get to Babylon, all their names get changed. That's why we don't remember Azariah, Mishael, and the other one. Either way, that's why I can't remember him. Azariah, Mishael, and Benaniah. Those are the 3 men that were thrown into the fiery furnace. We know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which are actually their pagan names. Azariah, Mishael, and Benaniah are their Hebrew names. So that checks out that he was given an Egyptian name and therefore an Egyptian identity, but he did not conform totally to the culture. Instead, he kept his identity as a Hebrew and named his sons Hebrew names, which again, I think is more significant than having children during a famine, personally. So, I told you this would be quick, because again, it's kind of a story. There's not really a lot to unpack and question. Maybe I could have gone into why I think Potiphar and Potiphar are the same person, but I don't think it really matters for the story. And I don't think the argument is, there's not much of an argument to be made. So, had you been in class, we would have beaten the lunch rush by a country mile. Anyhow, or you would have asked a question about something, and I would have had to scramble, and I would have wrote epistemology across the board and explained what I thought that meant. Who knows what would have happened? I miss that. I'm going to be honest with you. I miss having you guys in here and derailing the conversation, but in like a good way, in a fun way that we can talk about things. I hope we can get back soon. Until then, we will be back next week for another lesson. So I can't wait to see you all, and I hope you have a great week.